The voice inside your head is not you. That voice has convinced you otherwise. It speaks in first person. It uses your memories. It produces your opinions and your judgments and your self-assessments with such seamless continuity that questioning its origins would feel like questioning your own existence. But that voice, the one running your internal narrative right now, as you hear these words, is not the authentic you. It is the ego, and it has been running your life into the ground for decades while you mistook its commentary for your own thinking. You have never separated yourself from it. That is why it still owns you. The ego is not a philosophical abstraction. It is the psychological machinery that produces your sense of being a distinct, separate, defended self. It monitors every situation for threat. It evaluates every interaction for status implications. It generates the running commentary that tells you how you are being perceived and whether the perception requires adjustment. It never rests. It never stops calculating. And it presents all of this activity as your thinking, when it is actually the ego's activity, performed in your voice. Jung understood the ego's function with a precision most men find uncomfortable. The ego is not inherently pathological. Every human needs an ego to navigate existence, to maintain coherent identity, to manage social reality, to organize experience around a stable sense of self. The problem is not that the ego exists. The problem is what happens when the ego stops being a tool the psyche uses and starts being the totality of what a man believes himself to be. When the ego becomes the man is no longer alive. He is being performed. You have been performed by your ego for years. It made decisions and delivered them to you as your own decisions. It generated reactions and presented them as your authentic responses. It constructed an identity from the accumulated evidence of approval and rejection, and then defended that identity as if defending it was the same as defending you. It is not. The identity the ego defends is the ego's identity. The man beneath it, the one who existed before the construction began, has been silent for so long, you may have forgotten he exists. He exists. He is just no longer in charge. Nietzsche diagnosed what happens to men who never separate from their ego. He saw that the ego, unexamined and unopposed, becomes the man's jailer. It produces elaborate justifications for the fear that actually drives his behavior. It generates sophisticated defenses for the insecurity that actually motivates his decisions. It recruits the man's intelligence in service of its own survival and delivers explanations so internally consistent that the man accepts them as authentic self-knowledge. The ego does not hate you. It is trying to protect you. That is the problem. The ego is built to manage threat. Its entire function is to keep you safe from anything that would destabilize your sense of self. It does this by filtering reality, accepting evidence that confirms your identity, rejecting evidence that challenges it, by controlling relationships, maintaining distance from anyone who sees through the construction, drawing closer to those who reinforce it, by governing decisions, selecting options that preserve the status quo, avoiding options that threaten your current self-concept. This feels like self-preservation. It is actually self-imprisonment. Because what the ego preserves is not you. It is the version of you that the ego has constructed to feel safe. The accumulated adaptations, the defensive strategies, the carefully maintained self-image that the ego believes is necessary for survival. All of this is preserved at the cost of everything genuine. The genuine desires that do not fit the self-image. Suppressed. The authentic reactions that threaten the construction. Edited. The real responses that would require the ego to surrender control. Never permitted to surface at all. The ego kills you one suppression at a time, and it feels like living. Marcus Aurelius understood this with the precision of a man who had observed his own ego operating across decades of absolute power. He wrote in his private meditations about the specific difficulty of distinguishing between the self and the ego's activity. He warned repeatedly about the tendency of the mind to produce convincing narratives about its own motivations, narratives that serve the ego's comfort rather than the truth. He was not warning his readers, he was warning himself. Because the ego's operation is not visible from the inside, it requires sustained, deliberate, often brutal self-examination to detect. Most men do not perform that examination. The ego ensures it. You can observe the ego at work in your most defensive moments. The sudden tightness when someone questions a fundamental belief. The disproportionate anger at a comment that should not have mattered. The instant withdrawal when someone gets close enough to see through the presentation. These reactions are not you. These are the ego defending itself, using your body, your voice, your reasoning, against what it perceives as a threat to its continued operation. That defense feels like authentic self-protection. It is not. It is the ego protecting itself from examination. Schopenhauer identified the blind will beneath all of this, the pre-rational force driving human behavior without reference to conscious intention. The ego is one of the will's most sophisticated productions. It presents itself as conscious, rational, deliberate identity. Beneath that presentation, it operates on entirely different terms. Managing fear, pursuing status, avoiding exposure, maintaining the conditions that produced its construction in the first place. The man who believes he is acting from genuine values is almost certainly being operated by an ego that has convinced him it is his genuine values. The ego's greatest achievement is making itself invisible while remaining in total control. Consider the things you want, not the things you perform wanting, the actual desires beneath the performance. How many of them would survive if the ego were not present to filter them? How many of your current ambitions exist because they genuinely matter to you, versus because they would elevate the ego's status? How many of the achievements you are pursuing would hold any meaning if no one would ever know you had achieved them? For most men, the answer is devastating, because most of what they call their ambition is the ego's ambition. The drive to accumulate status, the pursuit of recognition, the need to be seen as a particular kind of man. Strip away the ego's involvement, and most of these pursuits collapse immediately, because most of them were never really about the thing itself. They were about the ego's need to be seen as someone who had achieved it. This is what makes the ego killing you so difficult to detect. The life it produces looks like a life. The achievements look like achievements. The relationships look like relationships. From the outside and from most angles on the inside, the ego's life is indistinguishable from a real one. The difference is only visible in the quiet moments, when the ego is too tired to maintain its performance, and something else surfaces that has been buried beneath the activity for years. That something else is you, or what remains of you. The ego is not the enemy. in the simple sense. Men who declare war on their ego produce the same result as men who worship it. They just do it while believing they are enlightened. Because the ego can absorb the identity of being egoless. The ego can incorporate the project of destroying itself into a new version of itself that feels more advanced. This is one of the ego's most sophisticated defenses. It will let you dismantle it in small ways, as long as the dismantling produces a new identity for you to occupy. You cannot defeat the ego by fighting it. You defeat it by recognizing that it is not you. Jung called this the process of individuation, the long, demanding, often brutal work of separating the conscious self from its identifications with the ego and the persona and the collected defenses that have merged with identity over decades. Individuation is not a peaceful process. It requires sitting with the specific discomfort of realizing that most of what you have called yourself was not. That the ambitions were the ego's ambitions. That the reactions were the ego's reactions. That the self-image you have been protecting was the ego's self-image, not yours. Most men cannot tolerate this recognition for more than a few moments before the ego reasserts itself. It does this through elaborate justifications, through sudden certainty that the examination has gone far enough, through the specific exhaustion that appears whenever you approach the examination from a different angle. The ego has an entire catalog of defenses that feel like legitimate reasons to stop examining it. These defenses feel exactly like your own thinking, because the ego is your thinking, until you develop the capacity to observe it rather than be it. That capacity is what Jung meant by consciousness. Most men never develop it. They live and die inside the ego's narrative, never separating, never observing, never recognizing that the voice running the internal monologue is not the self it claims to be. The cost of this is not abstract. It is measured in the life you actually lead versus the life that could have been possible. The relationships you settled for because the ego required certain conditions. The opportunities you avoided because they threatened the ego's self-concept. The desires you abandoned because they did not fit the narrative the ego was constructing. Each of these costs is real. Each of them accumulates, and by the time most men recognize the pattern, if they ever do, the recognition arrives too late to reclaim what the ego has already spent. The ego is not your ally. It never was. It is the reason your life has the exact shape it has. Every compromise, every avoidance, every pattern that feels inevitable. The ego has been killing the parts of you it could not use. It has been suppressing the parts of you it could not control. It has been editing your experience in real time, ensuring that only the data that reinforces its operation reaches your conscious awareness. This has been happening for as long as you can remember, and it is happening right now as you hear these words. The voice that is already starting to explain why this does not apply to you is the ego.